back to the daily grind, and shout out to the full-time patrons. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
And what is going on, fight fans? It is time to break down and predict the first UFC fight card of the year, the first UFC fight card on ESPN Plus. We're going to have a champ vs. champ super fight. TJ Dillashaw, the UFC's bantamweight champion, taking on Henry Cejudo, the UFC's flyweight champion, in the main event. We are also going to have a co-main event that's going to be thunderous, as we're going to have Greg Hardy, former Carolina Panther and Dallas Cowboy, now transitioned to MMA. He's going to be making his UFC debut, taking on Alan Crowder. Someone's going to sleep in that fight. So without further ado, let's get into these breakdowns and predictions. We're going to start with the first fight of the main card. Now, there was another fight on the main card. It was Glover Teixeira versus Ian Cutelaba down here. But Ian Cutelaba was injured right before I made these predictions. So I'm still going to break down an extra fight. But there's another great fight on this card that's not on the main card. The main event of the prelims, Donald Cerrone versus Alex Hernandez. Holy flying flipping flapjacks, that is a hell of a fight. That fight could easily be the main event of another fight night any other time. This is a great fight. Alex Hernandez, up and coming, dangerous prospect, but he's already in the top 15, so I don't even know if it's safe to call him a prospect, even though he's only got 2 fights in the UFC. But this kid is the real deal. He's going to be taking on Donald Cowboy Cerrone, UFC veteran. I mean, guy willing to fight anyone, anywhere, any place, and he put that on display in this fight by taking a very tough challenge against Alexander Hernandez. So we're going to start off by breaking down this fight. Then we'll get to the rest of the main card. So in this fight, we've got number 13th ranked welterweight in the world, but he's going back down to lightweight. Donald Cerrone's been looking to go back down to lightweight, and now he's got his chance, but it's not an easy fight down here by any means. It's a really tough. I mean, there's no easy fights in the UFC, but I'm saying, boy, to be going back down to lightweight, which Donald Cerrone has been wanting, he's fighting a killer. Alex Hernandez is not hype. This guy's drive and focus almost scares me. Even after winning against a ranked opponent in his UFC debut, he wasn't satisfied. He's always talking about how his mission is bigger than him and there are forces greater than him and to help him succeed. And on top of favorable matchmaking in the UFC, this kid has serious potential, man. He reminds me of like an army sergeant that decided to turn into a pro MMA fighter rather than go back out for like his 9th deployment. This is a tough fight for the savvy veteran Donald Cerrone, who's always down to fight anyone, anywhere, anytime. Donald Cerrone's coming off of an impressive first-round submission win over Mike Perry in a fight that a lot of people counted Donald Cerrone out of, but I didn't. Of course, Mike Perry had the power to knock out Donald Cerrone, but Donald Cerrone's got more than 20 fights in the UFC, and for sure was more well-rounded and a technical fighter than Mike Perry. So I picked Cowboy to win that fight. But this fight right here, Nick, I feel similar to the way I felt before the Donald Cerrone fight when he fought Darren Till. And I picked Darren Till to win that fight. And we see how that played out, man. And I feel similar to here because Alexander Hernandez is a guy that a lot of people, if you don't know about Alex Hernandez yet, man, you might find out after this fight. Darren Till really bursted onto the scene when he knocked out Donald Cerrone in the first round. And Alex Hernandez, that's a possibility in this fight. Alex Hernandez could also just out-wrestle Donald Cerrone. I mean, he could submit Donald Cerrone. And Donald Cerrone could do each of those things to him as well. That's why this is a great fight. But still, man, I think if Cerrone is going to win this fight, it's going to be via submission because Alex Hernandez has a lot of potential. But as of right now, he's still more of a dominant wrestler. He's got knockout power, we've seen in the UFC. And he's got a serious fight team behind him. So he's constantly improving. And he will be a world-class fighter in the next year or two, I believe. But I think there's still a chance for Cerrone to beat him here with his jiu-jitsu. Now, I'm going to give the edge to Alex Hernandez to win this fight. But it's because I'm taking the young dangerous stud who has a great fight team, skill set, mentality, and focus, and could, you know, be a future world champion with all of those things combined. Donald Cerrone, he's the savvy, well-rounded veteran. I feel like Alex Hernandez can knock out, submit, or beat Donald Cerrone via unanimous decision in this fight. I think he has slightly more paths to victory. While Donald Cerrone, his best chance I think is going to be to win via submission. He could of course catch Alex Hernandez. He could knock him out. But I think if this fight goes to decision, it's going to be a tough one for Donald Cerrone to win, because I don't see him out grappling Alex Hernandez throughout this fight. So he's going to have to keep the fight standing and like pick this guy apart. But man, good luck with that. So yeah, I'm giving a slight edge to Alex Hernandez. So we'll get the green check on the screen and we'll put that over on Alex Hernandez. Donald Cerrone, man, that was a great win over Mike Perry in his last fight. We'll see if he can do it again here, you know, because Alex Hernandez is somewhat a UFC newcomer, but he's got a dangerous skill set. And like I said, the drive, the mentality, just, if you haven't heard any of this kid's interviews, just go listen. I mean, he's serious. He's serious. It's crazy. So I like Alex Hernandez. Alexander the Great Hernandez taking on Donald Cowboy Cerrone. I'm taking Alexander Hernandez. So moving on to the first fight of the main card we're going to be breaking down. It's going to be Paige VanZant versus Rachel Ostovich. I don't feel like I need to break this fight down too much in depth, because I feel like it's a fight Paige VanZant's supposed to win, and she has to win. I mean, I feel like it's a fight she has to win. Paige VanZant moved up from 115 pounds after losing to Michelle Waterson and a few bad weight cuts, and then she lost her flyweight debut to Jessica Rose Clark, and she broke her arm in that fight. And in the meantime, she decided to get breast implants, which I feel like eliminates her ability to ever make 115 pounds again, unless MMA adopts full-time MMA's titty clause. That's another topic for another day. So she's stuck at this new weight class, fighting girls who will probably have a little bit of a size advantage on her, or other girls who aren't elite level fighters, such as Rachel Ostovich, who is, in my opinion, a certified dime piece and would probably be fighting at 105 pounds if it weren't for about the 15 pounds of TNA most strawweight fighters don't have. Female fighters, I guess you could say. And she would probably not be fighting in the UFC if not for her attractiveness, as she's a 4-4 fighter who started fighting pro about 5 years ago. So she could very well be like an Invicta, and even there, I don't know the level of success. Now, women's MMA isn't as far as men's MMA, so the UFC is definitely more lenient on the records. As we've seen girls like Angela Magana be in the UFC, you know, riding 4-fight losing streaks. Like so girls sometimes get a little more leeway before they get cut because of their record. But still, at 4-4, you know, that's if you move to 4-5 after this fight, you're gonna have a losing record, and your skill set is not something that, you know, that stands out. So I'm picking Paige VanZant. She's got legit UFC experience. She's been fighting with Team Alpha Male and other legit fight teams through her UFC career. Also, Rachel Ostovich is possibly going through a lot personally, as she just made headlines a couple of weeks ago for potentially suffering a broken orbital bone in a domestic abuse attack at the hands of her significant other. So it's reasonable to question if she should even be cleared to fight this soon. I mean, if she just had a broken orbital, what, 2-3 weeks ago? You know what I'm saying? I mean, if she was in a UFC fight and she had a broken orbital, I'm sure the commission wouldn't clear her to fight. So maybe it wasn't all the way, the orbital wasn't actually broken, maybe, you know, so I'm not sure. But yeah, she's possibly injured, probably not fully focused on the fight throughout this camp with all the shit going on personally. There's going to be media asking her not only about the fight and the aforementioned domestic violence, but also Greg Hardy's on this card. She's been getting asked about that, so she's gonna have to really find a way to focus on this fight to win it, because Paige VanZant does have some legit skills. We have seen her get some wins down to strawweight. She's looking for her first win up here at flyweight, so we'll see if she can get it. But yeah, so I'm picking Paige VanZant to win this fight. We will move on. We've got some great fights coming up, including a flyweight fight between Joseph Benavidez and Dustin Ortiz. That's what we're going to get to now, man. I like this fight. It's a flyweight fight, and on potentially a card that could, we might not see any flyweight fights after this night. I'm not sure if the UFC has any booked, but if they do, I would be surprised, because tonight is the night that potentially the UFC loses their flyweight champion. Potentially. Now, Henry Cejudo could win and really shake shit up, but the UFC has been trending toward closing their flyweight division. We've seen Demetrius Johnson traded. We've seen a lot of flyweight contenders and fighters be released from their contracts. And so the flyweight division in the UFC, their future looks bleak. And with that being said, this is a flyweight fight, but it's a good flyweight fight between two really good flyweight fighters. And Joseph Benavidez is one of the reasons I feel confident in saying the flyweight division has always been underrated, because Joseph Benavidez has 31 pro fights. In his first 29 pro fights, he didn't lose to anybody not named Demetrius Johnson or Dominic Cruz. He lost, those were the only two guys he lost to. He beat everybody else, which means he's a very good fighter, world-class flyweight fighter, fought a little bit at bantamweight as well. Joseph Benavidez, one of my favorite flyweights and one of the best flyweights in the world. Now, with that being said, Dustin Ortiz, low-key, has 26 pro fights himself on his resume, which is only 5 behind Joseph Benavidez. And with that being said, Joseph Benavidez, he did lose to Sergio Pettis, but it was after a 1.5-year layoff, he took after winning a split decision over Henry Cejudo. I thought Cejudo won that fight. That's another topic for another day. But with that being said, Joseph Benavidez does have a win over current UFC champion Henry Cejudo, and after that fight, he took a 1.5 years off, came back, lost to Sergio Pettis, but Sergio Pettis had remained active. Sergio Pettis did prove himself to be one of the best flyweights in the world before recently moving up to bantamweight, because the UFC's flyweight division doesn't seem like it's going to be around much longer. So that's one of the guys, Sergio Pettis, who decided to move up to bantamweight, because you can either pretty much leave the UFC or you can try it out at bantamweight. Sergio Pettis went up to bantamweight, but he was just cracked the top 5 of the flyweight division. I mean, before this whole flyweight debacle. So Sergio Pettis is actually a really good fighter. I mean, he grew up in a fight family, brother, former UFC lightweight champion, trains with Duke Rufus, a legit fight team, and those guys down there. So Sergio Pettis is no pushover by any means. And on top of Joseph Benavidez' possible ring rust in that fight, that was actually a winnable fight for Sergio Pettis, and I don't think it was too much to the detriment of Joseph Benavidez, or it wasn't like something telling, oh, Joseph Benavidez, he's not that as good as we thought. No, he's still one of the best flyweights in the world. It just wasn't his night that night. Normally, I just pick Joseph Benavidez in any flyweight fight against anybody that's not the champion. But Dustin Ortiz is 26 pro. He has 26 pro fight experience. It gives me a little cause to pause before I just pick Joseph Benavidez to win this fight, because usually Joseph Benavidez does have a pretty significant experience advantage. Now, in this fight, Dustin Ortiz is currently riding a 3-fight winning streak. 2 of those are first-round KO wins. I'm not going to count him all the way out of this fight, but I am still going to give a slight edge to Joseph Benavidez, because I feel like he's fought and beat higher-level competition throughout his career, and actually has a win over Dustin Ortiz via unanimous decision about 4 years ago. So this is a rematch. Now, Joseph Benavidez was also able to bounce back from his loss to Sergio Pettis with the first-round finish of his own, when he TKO'd Alex Perez in the first round a couple months ago. So Joseph Benavidez seems to be back in top flyweight form. So I like him in this fight, and he's already beat Dustin Ortiz once in the past. But Dustin Ortiz has a lot of legit experience. He's got momentum right now, riding a 3-fight winning streak. And so he's going to, I'm not going to count him all the way out. He's dangerous. He can knock Joseph Benavidez out. Both of these guys have multiple paths to victory. So it's just a slight edge for me here for Joseph Benavidez. I'm going to give him a slight edge, and that's it. Now, if Dustin Ortiz wins, it's not going to shock me, because he's a very talented flyweight fighter, and he's one of the guys that could potentially be moving up into the top 5 of the division, or would be if this division was staying around. Now, with that being said, let's move to the next fight we've got. It's going to be between Gregor Gillespie and Yancy Medeiros. This is a great fight too. I really like this card, man. Yancy Medeiros, 15-5 in his pro career, taking on the number 15th ranked lightweight Gregor Gillespie, who's undefeated at 12-0. Yancy Medeiros is coming off of a fight of the year contending fight in his win over Cowboy Oliveira, then a round of the year contender in his most recent fight with Donald Cowboy Cerrone, in a fight where he was knocked out in the first round, but only after landing some good shots, and rocking Donald Cerrone himself in that first round in a back and forth 1-round brawl that lived up to the hype. if you're not a fan of Yancy Medeiros after those last 2 fights, you're either a racist or not a real fight fan. No, I'm just kidding. No, but yeah, you're probably not a real fight fan, or you're just casual and you haven't even seen the fights, because those fights were both fucking insane. And Yancy Medeiros earned a lot of respect and got some well-deserved time off after that last fight with Donald Cerrone. He's been out for about 9 months. This is a tough matchup for Yancy, though, or anybody, as a matter of fact, because Gregor Gillespie's a dominant wrestler that kind of came out of nowhere, going 7-0 on the regional scene, and he's now went 5-0 in the UFC, finishing 4 of those guys. Gregor Gillespie was a 4-time D1 All-American wrestler that won a national championship back in 2007. Any wrestler with those credentials has potential to do big things in this sport if they can develop their striking and jiu-jitsu enough to become a well-rounded fighter, because the best base for a mixed martial artist at an elite level is wrestling. I mean, you see it with John Jones, Daniel Cormier, Stipe Miocic. I mean, we could go on and on with, you know, the Khabib, the fighters that have great wrestling that are considered GOATs. I mean, TJ Dillashaw, a lot of the GOATs have a strong wrestling base, a lot of the champions. And Gregor definitely has that. So if he can get Yancy down and keep him there, he can have success in this fight. But that's a lot easier said than done. This is a tough fight for Gregor as well. He's 5-0 in the UFC currently, as I said, currently riding a 4-fight, or he's finished 4 of his last 5 opponents. He's coming off a second-round submission win over 11-1 Vince Pichel, who's a great fighter, but not on the level quite of Yancy Medeiros. I love this fight because it's another tough fight for Gregor Gillespie, and also a great test and way to get back in the top 15 for Yancy Medeiros, who would be in prime position to make a run in the UFC stacked lightweight division if he can beat a super tough wrestler and get in the top 15. Now, as far as my prediction, this is a super tough fight for me to call. I'm going to give a slight edge to the undefeated young wrestling stud Gregor Gillespie. Slight edge, though. Definitely not counting Yancy Medeiros out by any means. I'm actually rooting for him to win, kind of, because I'm a fan, and also I think he's deserving of a big opportunity and fight after his last 2 performances. And most importantly, I think he's got a real chance to win this fight. Gregor Gillespie won a split decision against Sidney Outlaw before coming to the UFC. And that was one of his only 2 fights he didn't get the finish, but it definitely showed there might be some chinks in his armor. So, you know, a guy on the regional scene, I feel like if he can fight you to a split decision, and that's no Yancy Medeiros, then Yancy can for sure win this fight. As long as he avoids being finished, doesn't get submitted, doesn't get knocked out, he could win a decision 100%. And he's going to be one of probably the highest level competition I feel like Gregor Gillespie has fought to date. Even though Gregor has been fighting tough guys, he hasn't been fighting scrubs by any means, but Yancy's just a step up. So we will see where Gregor's at, and we'll see what Yancy can do. Yancy can for sure win this fight. Will he? We'll see. But this is going to be a great fight and a great test for both fighters, so I can't wait to watch it. But giving the slight edge to Gregor Gillespie. Moving on to, yeah, I don't even got to move the check mark. We're definitely picking Greg Hardy in this fight. And I really don't think there's too much to break down, honestly. Yeah, I don't think I need to break this fight down, actually. Greg Hardy's just been knocking shit out. He's been getting fed heavyweights to knock out coming up through Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series and UFC developmental program. Now he's going to make his UFC debut on UFC's ESPN show, where he used to wreak havoc on the football field. I'm picking Greg Hardy to win via KO against Alan Crowder, who's coming off a first-round knockout loss and also making his UFC debut. Yeah, just another fight. I feel like Greg Hardy's just getting fed somebody to knock out, pretty much a Greg Hardy feeding. But yeah, Alan Crowder being a heavyweight and Greg Hardy being a little inexperienced, he can always land that shot, you know? Or maybe he can test Greg Hardy's cardio, something that, you know, we haven't seen because he's knocked everyone out in the first round. But he's looked tired after he knocked somebody out in like less than a minute on the Contender Series, and he was breathing like he was in the championship rounds on the post-fight mic. So maybe it's cardio, you know, that's a way Alan Crowder can try and test Greg Hardy. But if Greg Hardy just comes across that octagon, the Prince of War, man, he's probably going to get that first round knockout. And it's on ESPN, where he used to fucking, you know, play for the Panthers, the Cowboys. It's going to be his first time, you know, his UFC debut. He's been in the Contender Series, been on a little bit of smaller shows, but this is his UFC debut as well. I think we're getting a first round knockout here. We will see, though. Moving on to the main event of the evening. And might surprise you guys who I pick here, because I'm going Henry Cejudo. No, I'm not. Tricked you. I'm going TJ, but boy, it's close. This is really 50-50 for me. I'm not going to lie. Like, I really could go Henry in this fight. I legitimately believe he's got a good chance to win. I think it's 50-50. I'm going 51 TJ, 49 Cejudo. That's how close this fight is for me. I'm not counting Henry Cejudo out by any fucking means. Just like I didn't when he fought Demetrius Johnson. And look, he's got the fucking belt. Demetrius Johnson, one of the greatest fighters of all time. I picked Henry Cejudo to win that fight, and for good reason. Henry Cejudo's done nothing but constantly improve and been fighting at a world class at flyweight with his wrestling credentials at flyweight, being an Olympic level wrestler. Henry Cejudo's got the skills. Like we talked about earlier, if you've got that great wrestling base, you're never out of a fight. You've always got a chance. The thing about this fight, TJ Dillashaw, phenomenal wrestler. I mean, some people are looking at this fight like Olympic wrestling versus MMA wrestling. Who is TJ Dillashaw's MMA wrestling gonna be enough to counter Henry Cejudo's just dominant Olympic level, you know, his style of wrestling? So, man, this is a tough fight for me to call, because on top of that, this is at flyweight. If this was at bantamweight, I would go TJ. I would go TJ, because TJ's one of the greatest bantamweights of all time, and Henry Cejudo, the smaller fighter, coming up to 135, trying to challenge TJ. So for me, I would, and I still wouldn't count Henry Cejudo out of bantamweight. You know, that fight, I would just pick TJ. I would be more confident in my TJ pick. But the fact that we've never seen TJ Dillashaw fight at flyweight also gives me more cause to pause, and Henry Cejudo more of a chance to win in this fight. If TJ Dillashaw did lose this fight, boy, would that be crazy. He wouldn't lose his bantamweight belt, though. He would not lose his bantamweight belt. Henry Cejudo, though, would keep his. But what the fuck would the UFC do? You know, what will they do? Because they're already started getting rid of the flyweight division. They already started releasing guys. They legitimately started releasing flyweights. So if Henry Cejudo beats TJ Dillashaw, your bantamweight champion, keeps the flyweight belt, what do you do? Do you keep the flyweight division? Do you re-sign the guys you've already cut? Does Henry Cejudo now move up to bantamweight? I don't know. It would be wild. But he's got a chance, because we've never seen TJ at 125, so that could be a real possibility. But if TJ wins, he becomes a champ, as Conor McGregor, as Daniel Cormier, as Amanda Nunes have done in the UFC. And he's got potential to challenge at a third weight class as well, because there's only 10-pound jumps in between his weights, 135 to 125, 135 to 145. You know, for McGregor, he would have to jump 15 to challenge for another belt. For DC, there is no heavier weight class. For Amanda Nunes, there is no heavier weight class. So TJ Dillashaw's got the potential to be one of the only guys to challenge in the UFC for 3 belts, if he can win this very tough fight against Henry Cejudo. TJ Dillashaw's also kind of one of my favorite fighters, you know what I'm saying? Because he has been for a while. Just the trials and tribulations he kind of went through to get back to the belt after losing a split decision to Dominic Cruz. Didn't get the rematch, had to fight 2 #1 contenders, fought Cody Garbrandt, afterward won, had to rematch him, fought him again, won. Now he's getting to finally fight for this second belt. I mean, I'm a big fan of TJ Dillashaw, so that's why it's 51-49. I'm going 51-49 because this is a toss-up for me. So I guess my slight bias is going to be the deciding factor. I'm going TJ Dillashaw, but man, I can't wait to see how this plays out. So with that being said, thank you guys for tuning into these UFC on ESPN Plus 1 breakdown and predictions. If you haven't yet, man, hit subscribe. It'd be much appreciated. And also smash that thumbs up button like your middle name is Khabib. And let the full-time family know what you think in the comments. What are your predictions for UFC on ESPN Plus 1? I'm out.
Bye, Felicia.